you are privileged. Now, did hearing me say that get under your skin a little bit? And if it did, do you even understand why it got under your skin? I guess it's probably not, because privilege is a word that we hear a lot and is used a lot, but it's one we don't often stop to think about what it actually means and what's behind that word. The problem with that is that the word privilege actually has the ability to steal our power. And the way it does this is that it creates an us versus them mentality, and it creates a victim mentality. So our power actually lies in admitting that privilege does exist and in accepting that it's just a part of life. And then in understanding how privilege affects our lives and how it affects the lives of the people around us. So today we are going to take our power back, and we are going to take our power back by talking about privilege. By the end of this video, if you stick around with me, I hope you will gain a better understanding of what it means to be privileged. I hope you will start to recognize and accept some of your own privileges, and beyond that, start to be grateful for those privileges, because I think that's where your power lies. I think that's what's going to help get you to realize your full potential. I think that's a part of the journey. So before we start talking about privilege itself, I think there's another thing that we need to accept first, and that's that we are not all created equal. We don't all have to be treated the same way. We don't all have to have the same opportunities. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't believe in equal rights, because I definitely do. And I'll put this in terms of equal rights for men and women, just because as a woman, that's easy for me to speak to. So if I say that men and women should have equal rights, I don't mean that we're created equal. What I actually mean is that we should have the same options to choose from, and we should be given reasonable access to the same opportunities. And keyword there being reasonable access. But if we want the same access to the same opportunities, we have to be able to and willing to accept the terms that come along with those opportunities. So I created a hockey analogy in my post, and I went to hockey because my stepson plays hockey. My husband is addicted to hockey. Hockey's kind of a big deal in our house, and it was kind of an obvious one, or one that was easily relatable, and I think can bring the point home. Okay, so as a female, I am not created equally to male hockey players. So I have to accept that. And if I want to be on a male hockey team, I should be given the opportunity to do that, but I have to accept the terms of that opportunity. And those are that I have to be able to take the same hard hits as the men are going to take. I have to shoot the puck just as hard as they shoot it. And I have to be willing to get punched in the face by a male opponent, because the other males that I'm playing with are going to be getting punched in the face. So having equal rights just means that I should be given an opportunity to prove myself, a chance to prove myself, but it doesn't mean that I'm going to be given the opportunity of the same playing time if I'm not willing to put in the work that would be necessary to put myself on par with the male players. And that's not a problem. That's simple biology. I'm not as strong as a man. Okay, that's fine. Not naturally, anyway. But how I respond to that reality is where the problem comes in. And that is the problem with the word privilege. Privilege isn't the problem. How we define it and how we respond to the word privilege or being privileged is the problem. So first, it's helpful to understand what the responses are to the word privilege. And I think that'll be a huge step in taking our power back. So I've outlined 4 reactions that people would normally have when they hear the word privilege or privileged. So the first reaction would be that the person would, first of all, deny that that privilege even exists, and then they would deny that they have that privilege. And I get that, and I understand where the thought process is behind that and people thinking they aren't privileged, but I think that is because they're using an old definition. They're not using the commonly used current definition of privilege, and we'll get into that. The second reaction someone could have is to feel guilty about the privileges that they have. But there's nothing to feel guilty about, and having privileges is nothing to be guilty about. And if we can look at your privileges objectively and without becoming defensive, you'll start to see that. So that's something that we're going to talk about too. The third reaction could be to blame someone else who you think has more privileges than you for your lot in life. Now, I'm lucky enough that or fortunate enough that I have had a lot of privilege in my life. And so I can't really speak to this one too much. I don't really feel like I've been oppressed or been held down by anybody in my life. Fortunately, I'm grateful for that. So I'm not going to talk about this one too much, other than to say there is a quote that I heard a while ago, quite a long time ago, that sticks in the back of my mind, and it's from Dr. Robert Anthony. I had to look at his name again quickly. And the quote is, "When you blame others, you give up your power to change." So to those who react in that way, that's all I'm going to say about that. The fourth reaction could simply be to accept that you do have privileges and to decide how you're going to use those privileges and be grateful for those privileges. And that is where we want to be. That is where I want to spur those thoughts so that we can get there. All right, so back to the first reaction, which is denial. Again, I think it comes back to the definition of privilege. So let's talk about the Macmillan Dictionary definition of privilege. So I'm going to read this here. But in that dictionary, privilege is defined as a special benefit that is available only to a particular person or group. It's something nice that they feel lucky to have. So I'll go back to the hockey analogy again. And I would say in that example, so the male hockey players are just going to be stronger than me biologically. Now, I could become just as strong as them if I was willing to put in the work. But it's not going to come as naturally to me just because we're not built the same. So remember that privilege is a special benefit. In this case, I would say that the male hockey player's strength is a special benefit. And it is, generally speaking, only available to a particular person or group because it is only available to men naturally, generally speaking. And it's something they should feel lucky to have because it allows them to play the sport that they love. So, in my opinion, in the hockey analogy, strength is a privilege that the players have, and it meets the definition of privilege. But as you can see, it's not bad, it's not oppressive, it's simply biology. So if you're still agreeing with me that the strength of the hockey players is a privilege, again, I think it's because we're using two different definitions of the word, and we don't talk about privilege the same way that we used to, the same way that my parents would. I define it differently than they would, because what being privileged used to mean that you were someone who had everything handed to you, that you didn't have to work as hard in life as everyone else does. Maybe you were a trust fund baby, is maybe someone that comes to mind, or somebody who has benefited from nepotism and didn't earn their spot in life. But today, that's not how the word privileged is commonly used, and it's not the way that it's used by activists today. Now it's used to describe someone who is normal within a system, someone who the system was built for, so that the system that they're operating in gives them a much better chance to succeed than someone who that system was not designed for, who is not normal within that system. And that's what it would really mean to be privileged, and that's what it means the way that I'm talking about it. Back to the hockey analogy again. So there's no denying. These hockey players, the male hockey players, are definitely going to have to work their butts off. If they want playing time, they're going to have to work hard. It's not going to be handed to them. They're not going to meet the old definition of privilege. However, there is a system in place if, especially a male, if a male wants to play hockey, there is a system in place for them if they possess certain privileges. And the privileges they would have to possess would be, number one, it's going to be much easier for them if they're male. Okay, so that is a benefit that they would have that's not afforded to everyone. So, Females can definitely play hockey, but it's not as easy. The system is not developed for them. Second, you're going to have money to play for hockey. It's not a cheap sport. You have to pay for team fees, you have to pay for equipment, travel costs, tournament fees, all this stuff. You don't have that. You don't have a special benefit that some other people have. And third, you're going to have, as a kid, to get up to the point of playing as an adult. As a kid, you're going to have parents that are willing and able to cart you around to all of your hockey practices and games and tournaments. And that's a lot of travel involved in that. And if you don't have that, again, you don't have a special benefit that is available to some. So those are all privileges that you might not necessarily see as privileges, but they definitely are, because if you have them, they set you up to succeed within the hockey system. Okay, so the second reaction to being called privileged could be that you feel guilty or you feel ashamed. And I understand this reaction because I feel a little bit of that sometimes if I think about certain privileges that I feel that I have. But feeling guilty isn't going to help anyone, so we need to get over it. And we need to look at privilege objectively and without becoming defensive in order to not feel guilty about it. And I think where the guilt really comes from is in feeling like you have this privilege and you feel then like you have been oppressing someone somehow because you were blind to the issue to begin with. And now that you're aware of it, you feel bad that you were blind to it for so long. So let's just stop being blind to it. And that will get rid of some of that guilt. But also just realize that you did not decide to be born privileged if you feel like you do have privileges. Just as someone who doesn't have those privileges didn't decide to be born that way either. And so once you can accept that it's just something you were born with, you can then embrace it and use it. And you can use it to realize your own full potential. You can realize it to lift others up. You can do both in tandem. But once you can accept it and stop feeling guilty for it, you'll actually be able to use it, your privileges, for good. My goal in writing this post was to help us stop worrying about privilege and be grateful for the privileges that we have. Stop worrying about your own, stop worrying about other people's perceived privileges. Hopefully now we have a little bit of a better understanding of privilege and the definition of privilege that we're using today. But the hard part's yet to come, because now we need to really start talking about it openly and honestly, and I don't know how you start doing that other than acknowledging your own privilege. I think is probably the easiest way to go about it. Acknowledge your own, but beyond that, another step further, tell people that when you're acknowledging it, make sure that they know that you're grateful for it. Because then you're not taking it for granted, and people are going to be much more accepting of it, I think. Now, it's going to take some deliberate thinking for us to get there, because we don't talk about privilege. It's not something we have a lot of practice with. So, of course, I created a worksheet for you to get you started, and I also have a follow-up post that points out some what I call veiled privileges. So there's some privileges that a lot of people, myself included, possess that we don't even realize that we have. We don't even realize they are privileges, and I want to point them out so that we can start being grateful for them. So check that out in the follow-up post, and until next time, stay curious.